Officer, why was I stopped?
I'm not debating with you. Hand over your documents.
I'm asking for the report number. What's the basis for this stop?
You're making this harder than it needs to be.
I have the right to know why I'm being detained.
Step out of the vehicle, now.
Are you alleging I committed a crime?
Judge Marcus Sterling was 3 blocks from the Los Angeles County Courthouse when Officer Tyler Vance's lights blazed red and blue in his rearview mirror. Sterling hadn't been speeding, hadn't rolled through any stops, hadn't committed a single traffic violation. He was a federal magistrate about to become the living embodiment of the constitutional violations he'd been ruling against for 2 decades. What Vance didn't know: the sedan he was approaching belonged to a Stanford Law graduate who'd written precedent-setting opinions on unlawful detention. The briefcase on the passenger seat contained sealed grand jury testimony that would trigger federal marshal response protocols the moment it was threatened. And the pretextual traffic stop Vance was orchestrating would expose a pattern of racial profiling, cost taxpayers $7 million, and permanently end his law enforcement career before it barely began. If you want to see how one judge turned a racist traffic stop into a masterclass on civil rights enforcement, hit that like button and comment where you're watching from. And if you're new here, subscribe right now because tomorrow's story is even more unbelievable. Another person who discovered way too late they'd targeted someone completely untouchable. Let's continue. Judge Marcus Sterling was 46 years old. He graduated top of his class from Stanford Law School, spent 12 years as a civil rights attorney with a near-perfect record dismantling police misconduct cases, and clerked for the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals before his appointment to the federal bench. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 10,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these stories matter. Please subscribe to Voiceless Bodycam Files, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. Marcus Sterling's path to the federal bench hadn't been paved with privilege or connections. It had been earned through relentless excellence and an unwavering commitment to constitutional law. Growing up in South Central Los Angeles, he'd watched his own father get pulled over 17 times in 3 years, each stop a masterclass in humiliation disguised as law enforcement. Those experiences didn't make him bitter, they made him strategic. At Stanford, while his classmates were chasing corporate law salaries, Sterling was writing his thesis on Fourth Amendment violations in traffic stops. His professors recognized something rare: a legal mind that could bridge theoretical constitutional scholarship with the brutal reality of street-level injustice. He graduated with honors and immediately joined a civil rights firm that specialized in police accountability cases. For 12 years, Sterling built an almost mythical reputation. He didn't just win cases, he created precedents. His briefs were studied in law schools. His cross-examinations of officers who claimed "I feared for my life" became legendary for their surgical precision. He documented patterns, exposed lies, and forced departments to confront their own data. His 98% success rate wasn't luck, it was preparation meeting expertise. When the federal bench appointment came, some colleagues thought he was abandoning the fight. Sterling saw it differently. From the bench, he could shape the law itself, not just apply it. His rulings on qualified immunity, on probable cause, on the standards for reasonable suspicion, they reverberated through every police department in the Ninth Circuit. Officers learned to fear his courtroom not because he was vindictive, but because he was thorough. Sterling's chambers were filled with case files, each one a story of power abused and rights violated. He'd read thousands of traffic stop reports, heard countless officers testify about their gut feelings and furtive movements. He knew every trick, every euphemism, every way that bias disguised itself as protocol. On this particular morning, Sterling had just finished a preliminary hearing on a federal racketeering case. The grand jury files in his briefcase represented 18 months of investigation into organized crime. The documents were sealed, protected by federal law, and absolutely not subject to routine traffic stop searches. He'd presided over enough cases to know that most officers understood these boundaries. Most officers, but not all. As he merged onto Grand Avenue, his mind was on the afternoon's docket. He didn't notice the patrol car that had been following him since he left the courthouse parking structure. Tyler Vance had been a Los Angeles Police Department officer for exactly 9 months. In his mind, that made him a veteran. In reality, it barely made him off probation. He joined the force with something to prove, though he couldn't have articulated what. His father had been a cop, his uncle too, and they'd both told stories about the old days when policing meant dominance, not diplomacy. The academy had tried to teach him about de-escalation, implicit bias, constitutional limitations on searches and seizures. Vance had passed the tests, memorized the right answers, and promptly dismissed most of it as political correctness that would get him killed on the streets. His real education, he believed, came from riding with the older officers who taught him what the academy wouldn't: how to spot suspicious vehicles, how to articulate probable cause after the fact, how to make sure you controlled every encounter from the first moment. Vance's training officer had been put on desk duty 3 months into Vance's probationary period, too many complaints about aggressive stops, but by then the lessons had taken root. Vance had developed a pattern, though he didn't call it that. He called it proactive policing. His sergeant, overwhelmed with paperwork and understaffed shifts, didn't look too closely at Vance's stop data. If he had, he would have noticed that Vance stopped Black and Latino drivers at rates that couldn't be explained by traffic violations alone. In the group chat with his academy classmates, Vance bragged about his numbers. He called himself a sheepdog, protecting the flock. When other officers mentioned civilian complaints, Vance dismissed them as the cost of doing real police work. He'd collected commendations for vehicle recoveries and drug arrests, never acknowledging that those wins came from stops that wouldn't survive legal scrutiny. That morning, Vance was cruising near the courthouse, watching traffic. He'd learned that this area was profitable. Lots of people in nice cars who might have warrants, might have contraband, might give him something to pad his arrest record. When he saw the black Mercedes sedan with tinted windows, driven by a black man in a suit, every prejudice in his brain activated. The Mercedes used its turn signal, changed lanes smoothly, and maintained the speed limit. Vance followed for 2 blocks, waiting. When the Mercedes changed lanes again, perfectly legal, perfectly executed, Vance decided that was enough. He flipped on his lights. In his mind, he was about to make another good stop. In reality, he was about to destroy his career. Sterling saw the lights and felt a familiar combination of resignation and anger. He'd been driving for 30 years without a single accident, without a single legitimate traffic stop. Yet he'd been pulled over more times than he could count, each one a small humiliation that reminded him why his work mattered. He pulled to the curb smoothly, put the vehicle in park, and placed both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. This wasn't submission, it was strategy. He knew what came next because he'd watched it play out in hundreds of body camera videos. The approach, the exaggerated caution, the hand near the weapon, the commands designed to establish dominance rather than ensure safety. Vance exited his patrol car with his hand resting on his holster, his body language projecting threat rather than professional courtesy. He approached the driver's side window with the swagger of someone who believed a badge made him important. His body camera was recording, though he wasn't thinking about that. He was thinking about control. Sterling lowered his window exactly halfway, maintaining eye contact with the officer. "Good afternoon, officer. Can you tell me why I was stopped?" Vance's eyes narrowed. Most people he stopped were nervous, deferential, eager to please. This driver was calm, controlled, using the tone of someone accustomed to asking questions and expecting answers. It irritated Vance immediately. "License and registration," Vance demanded, ignoring the question. "You failed to signal before your lane change." Sterling's expression didn't change, but internally he was cataloging violations. He had signaled, he always did. This was a pretextual stop and they both knew it. "Officer, I signaled both lane changes, but I'll be happy to provide my credentials." "I didn't ask about your credentials," Vance snapped. "I asked for your license and registration." Sterling reached slowly for his wallet, narrating his movements. "I'm reaching for my identification now. It's in my inside jacket pocket." This was another strategic choice, creating a verbal record of compliance, demonstrating reasonableness, building the evidence file that would matter later. He pulled out his judicial identification card along with his driver's license and handed both through the window. Vance glanced at them, and his expression shifted, not to recognition or respect, but to suspicion. "Federal judge," Vance's tone dripped with skepticism. "This is a fake ID, a really good one but fake." Sterling's hands remained on the wheel. "Officer, that is my official judicial identification, issued by the United States courts. My driver's license confirms my identity. I respectfully suggest you verify this information before proceeding." Vance held the ID up to the light, examining it like he was some kind of forgery expert. In reality, he'd never seen a federal judicial ID before and had no idea what he was looking at. What he did know was that he didn't like being challenged, didn't like the calm confidence in Sterling's voice, and definitely didn't like the implication that he should verify anything. "Step out of the vehicle," Vance ordered, his hand moving closer to his weapon. Sterling didn't move. "Officer, on what legal basis are you ordering me out of my vehicle? You've cited a lane change violation, which is a minor traffic infraction that doesn't require me to exit the vehicle. I've provided identification. What is your probable cause for escalation?" Every word was deliberate. Sterling was speaking for the body camera now, creating a record that would be dissected by attorneys and review boards. He knew the law better than Vance ever would. Pennsylvania v. Mims allowed officers to order drivers out of vehicles during traffic stops, but the context mattered. The reasonableness mattered. And ordering a federal judge out of his car because you didn't believe his credentials wasn't reasonable. It was ego. Vance's face flushed. "I don't need to explain probable cause to you. You're being detained for investigation. Exit the vehicle now or I'll remove you." "Investigation of what crime specifically?" Sterling's voice remained level, almost clinical. He was documenting every procedural violation in real time. Unlawful detention requires reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. A lane change, even if the officer's claim were true, didn't provide that. And the officer's refusal to verify credentials before escalating suggested something far more troubling than a routine traffic stop. "Investigation of fraud," Vance improvised, gesturing at the judicial ID. "Possession of fraudulent government identification. That's a federal crime." Sterling almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he reached very slowly for his phone. "Officer, I'm going to call my chambers to have my clerk verify my identity. You're welcome to speak with them directly." "Put the phone down." Vance's hand was on his weapon now. "Put it down now." This was the moment Sterling had been waiting for. The moment when the officer's aggression crossed from concerning to clearly unlawful. The moment that would be replayed in courtrooms and training sessions. The moment Vance's career ended, though he didn't know it yet. Sterling carefully placed the phone on the dashboard, hands returning immediately to the wheel. "I'm complying, officer, but I'm telling you clearly, you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights. You have no probable cause for this stop, no reasonable suspicion for this detention, and no legal basis for denying me the opportunity to verify my identity." Vance's eyes shifted to the passenger seat, where a leather briefcase sat innocuously. In his mind, he saw opportunity. If this guy was impersonating a federal judge, Maybe the briefcase contained more fake documents, maybe drugs, maybe weapons. Maybe something that would justify this stop and prove Vance's instincts right. "What's in the briefcase?" Vance demanded. Sterling's response was immediate and firm. "That briefcase contains sealed grand jury materials. It is protected by federal law, specifically Rule 6E of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure. You have no authority to search it, no legal right to examine its contents, and touching it would constitute obstruction of justice." The words meant nothing to Vance. He heard sealed and protected and interpreted them as evasion, as hiding something. His training had covered search and seizure law, but he'd learned to reinterpret those rules through the lens of officer safety and probable cause. If a driver was nervous, that was suspicious. If a driver was too calm, that was also suspicious. Everything became evidence when you decided someone was guilty first and found reasons second. "Open the briefcase," Vance ordered. "Absolutely not." Sterling's voice hardened slightly. "Officer, I need you to understand the gravity of what you're demanding. That briefcase contains testimony from a sealed federal grand jury investigation. The documents inside are classified as sensitive law enforcement materials. If you force me to open it, you will be violating federal law. If you attempt to search it yourself, you will be committing a felony. I am not being dramatic. I am telling you legal facts." Vance reached for the door handle. "If you won't open it, I will. You're under arrest for obstruction and possession of fraudulent identification." Sterling's hand moved to a small button on his key fob. It was a feature most people never used, installed in vehicles provided to federal judges for exactly this kind of scenario. Protocol 9, emergency notification to the U.S. Marshals Service that a federal judicial officer was being unlawfully detained. He pressed it. 200 miles away, in a monitoring center that most people didn't know existed, an alert flashed on multiple screens. Judge Marcus Sterling's vehicle had activated emergency protocols. His GPS coordinates populated instantly. The system showed he was stopped on Grand Avenue, 3 blocks from the courthouse, outside normal travel patterns. Within 90 seconds, 2 things happened simultaneously. A supervisor at the Marshal Service grabbed a phone to call the LAPD command center, and a tactical response team was dispatched to Sterling's location. The response time for threats to federal judicial officers was measured in minutes, not hours. Vance pulled open the car door, still oblivious to what he'd triggered. Sterling stepped out of the vehicle slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. He was 6 feet tall, and at 46 he still maintained the athletic build from his years running marathons. But he didn't use his physicality to intimidate. He used his presence, the quiet authority of someone who'd commanded courtrooms filled with hostile defendants and skeptical attorneys. "Officer, you are making a series of choices that will have severe consequences," Sterling said quietly. "I have activated emergency protocols. Federal marshals have been notified of this stop. They are en route to this location. I am documenting every violation of my rights, and you need to stop this immediately." Vance heard federal marshals and laughed. It sounded like a bluff, like something a desperate person would say when they were caught. He'd heard plenty of people claim they were going to sue, going to call their lawyer, going to get him fired. None of it ever amounted to anything. "Turn around and put your hands on the vehicle," Vance ordered. Sterling complied, but he kept talking. "My name is Marcus Sterling. I'm a federal magistrate judge for the Central District of California. My chambers are in the Edward R. Roble Federal Building. My clerk's name is Jennifer Chen. The number for my chambers is on my business card, which is in my wallet. I am asking you one final time to verify my identity before you proceed with this unlawful arrest." Vance pulled Sterling's arms behind his back and snapped on handcuffs. The metal clicked shut with finality. In Vance's mind, he just arrested a sophisticated criminal who'd invested in high-quality fake credentials. In reality, He just handcuffed a federal judge on a public street, 3 blocks from the courthouse, in broad daylight. A few pedestrians had stopped to watch. One of them was filming on a phone. Another was a court reporter who recognized Sterling and was already dialing the courthouse security office. The scene was being documented from multiple angles: Vance's body camera, the dash cam from his patrol car, Sterling's vehicle camera system, and at least 2 civilian phones. Vance walked Sterling to the back of the patrol car. "You can explain everything downtown," he said with satisfaction. Sterling sat in the back seat, hands cuffed behind him, and did something that would later be analyzed in law enforcement training sessions across the country. He smiled slightly, not with amusement, but with the grim satisfaction of someone who knew exactly how this would end. 3 blocks away, 2 black SUVs with federal plates were moving through traffic at high speed, lights concealed but active. The dispatcher's voice crackled through their radios. "Federal judge detained, possible impersonation of officer, requesting immediate tactical response." The cavalry was 60 seconds away. Vance was walking back to Sterling's Mercedes, planning to search it for evidence, when the first SUV appeared. It didn't pull up slowly or announce itself politely. It cut across traffic and screeched to a halt at an angle that blocked Vance's patrol car. The second SUV blocked the other end of the street. 4 U.S. Marshals emerged, weapons drawn but held low, their movements coordinated with the precision of tactical operators. The lead marshal's voice cut through the air like a blade. "LAPD officer, step away from the vehicle and show me your hands." Vance froze, his brain struggling to process what was happening. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was the one with authority. He was the one making the arrest. These people were interfering with his stop. "I'm a police officer," Vance shouted back. "I have a suspect in custody." The lead marshal, a 20-year veteran named Carson who'd protected federal judges through death threats and assassination attempts, walked forward with controlled aggression. "That suspect is Federal Magistrate Judge Marcus Sterling. You have unlawfully detained a federal judicial officer. Release him immediately and step away from the vehicle." Vance's world tilted. The words "federal magistrate judge" suddenly sounded different coming from a U.S. Marshal with a Glock in his hand. He had fake ID. I was verifying. "Open the patrol car. Now." Carson's voice left no room for negotiation. Vance's hands shook as he unlocked the rear door. Sterling stepped out, still handcuffed, still calm. Carson's expression shifted when he saw the cuffs. "Officer, you handcuffed a federal judge." "I didn't know. He said he was, but I thought." "You thought?" Carson's voice dripped with disgust. He personally removed Sterling's handcuffs, his movements gentle and apologetic. "Your Honor, are you injured?" "I'm fine, Marshal Carson." Sterling rubbed his wrists where the cuffs had been too tight. "But we need to secure the briefcase in my vehicle. It contains sealed grand jury materials." Carson's eyes widened slightly. Sealed grand jury materials meant ongoing federal investigations, meant classified information, meant that this traffic stop had just potentially compromised federal cases worth millions of dollars and years of work. He turned to Vance with an expression that could freeze water. "Did you search the vehicle?" "No, but I was about to." "You were about to contaminate evidence in a federal investigation." Carson pulled out his phone. "I need to notify the FBI and the Inspector General. This is a disaster." Another marshal had already photographed the scene from multiple angles. The body camera footage would be subpoenaed. The dashcam footage would be preserved. Every second of Vance's catastrophic judgment would be documented, analyzed, and used as evidence in multiple investigations. Sterling stood quietly, watching Vance's face as reality finally penetrated his ego. The officer's hands were trembling. His confidence had evaporated. He looked young suddenly, younger than his 26 years, like a child who'd broken something expensive and was just now understanding the consequences. The investigation that followed was surgical and merciless. The LAPD's Internal Affairs Division descended on Vance's record within hours, and what they found was damning. Over 9 months, Vance had conducted 127 traffic stops. Of those, 94 involved Black or Latino drivers, a statistical anomaly so extreme that it couldn't be explained by traffic patterns or neighborhood demographics. The stops followed a pattern: vague traffic violations, failure to signal following too closely, swerving within the lane, aggressive approaches, demands to search vehicles, arrests for minor infractions that should have resulted in citations. The data told a story that Vance's reports had tried to hide. He wasn't fighting crime, he was profiling with a badge. Sterling's case became the catalyst, but it wasn't the only one. Civil rights attorneys across Los Angeles began reaching out to drivers Vance had stopped. Stories emerged of humiliation, illegal searches, threats. One man had been arrested for resisting when he asked why he'd been stopped. A woman had her car searched after Vance claimed he smelled marijuana. None was found, and she'd never used drugs. A teenager had been handcuffed at gunpoint during a traffic stop for a broken taillight. The FBI's Civil Rights Division opened an investigation into the entire precinct. They found that Vance wasn't an aberration. He was a symptom. The department had stop quotas that weren't officially acknowledged but were tacitly enforced. Supervisors rewarded aggressive officers with better shifts and commendations. Complaints were filed but rarely resulted in discipline. The culture rewarded the exact behavior that Vance had embodied. Sterling could have settled quietly. The city attorney's office came to him within a week, offering a substantial payment in exchange for confidentiality and a promise not to pursue criminal charges. It was the standard playbook: pay the victim, bury the evidence, move on. Sterling refused. Instead, he demanded a public accounting. He wanted the stop data released. He wanted the training records examined. He wanted every officer in that precinct to understand that badges didn't grant immunity from constitutional law. His attorney filed a civil rights lawsuit that laid out not just his own experience, but the systematic pattern of violations that made his arrest possible. The depositions were brutal. Vance, under oath, tried to explain his decision-making. He claimed he'd had reasonable suspicion based on Sterling's nervous behavior, though the body camera showed Sterling had been completely calm. He claimed the briefcase looked suspicious, though he couldn't articulate what made a leather briefcase inherently criminal. He claimed he was following his training, though his training officers testified that he'd done the opposite of what they'd taught. The city's lawyers saw the writing on the wall. This wasn't going to trial. They couldn't put Vance on the stand in front of a jury and expect to win. The evidence was too clear, the violations too egregious, and the victim too credible. The settlement was announced on a Tuesday morning: $7 million, paid by the city of Los Angeles to Judge Marcus Sterling and to a newly created civilian oversight fund. The number made headlines, but the details mattered more. Sterling didn't keep the money. He structured the settlement so that $2 million would go to establishing the Sterling Police Accountability Project, a nonprofit dedicated to training officers on constitutional rights and investigating patterns of racial profiling. $3 million would fund legal representation for people who couldn't afford attorneys in civil rights cases. The remaining $2 million would support community programs in the neighborhoods most affected by aggressive policing. Vance was terminated. His post-certification, the license that allowed him to work as a police officer anywhere in California, was permanently revoked. The state attorney general's office considered criminal charges for violating Sterling's civil rights under color of law, but ultimately decided the career destruction and financial liability were sufficient punishment. Vance would never wear a badge again. But the changes went deeper. The LAPD implemented new protocols requiring supervisors to review stop data monthly, looking for racial disparities. Officers were required to undergo implicit bias training, not the checkbox version, but intensive sessions led by civil rights attorneys and community members. Body cameras became mandatory for all traffic stops, with footage automatically flagged for review if certain keywords appeared. Fake ID. I don't believe you. You're lying. The federal monitor assigned to oversee the department used Sterling's case as a baseline. Every policy change was measured against a simple question. Would this have prevented Judge Sterling's unlawful arrest? If the answer was no, the policy wasn't strong enough. 3 months after the settlement, Sterling was back on the bench, presiding over cases with the same measured authority he'd always brought to the courtroom. But something had shifted. Officers who appeared before him understood that this wasn't a judge who theorized about police misconduct. He'd experienced it personally. When he ruled on Fourth Amendment violations, when he suppressed evidence from unlawful searches, when he held officers accountable for constitutional violations, everyone in the courtroom knew he'd earned that authority in the most direct way possible. Tyler Vance disappeared from Los Angeles. Last anyone heard, he was working security at a shopping mall in Nevada, earning minimum wage and wearing a uniform that carried no legal authority. The $7 million price tag followed him, not as debt he personally owed, but as a reputation he could never escape. He was the rookie who arrested a federal judge and cost his city a fortune. And Judge Marcus Sterling, he still drives that black Mercedes. He still takes Grand Avenue from the courthouse, and he's never been pulled over since. Word travels fast in law enforcement circles, and everyone knows the car, knows the face, knows the story. The briefcase still sits on his passenger seat, still filled with sealed documents. But now it represents something more than just evidence. It's a reminder that constitutional rights aren't suggestions, that badges don't grant immunity from the law, and that sometimes the person you profile is exactly the wrong person to underestimate. 7 million reasons to think twice before you let bias override judgment. 7 million reasons to verify before you escalate. 7 million reasons to remember that everyone, regardless of what they look like or where they're driving, deserves to be treated with dignity under the law. The body camera footage from that stop is now required viewing at the police academy. New recruits watch Tyler Vance destroy his career in real time, watch his confidence crumble as federal marshals arrive, watch him realize that his gut feeling was just prejudice dressed up as policing. And they learn what happens when you forget that your job isn't to hunt criminals, it's to protect rights, even when that's harder than making arrests. Especially then.